Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
Wrestling is a new peak of popularity, but for years it's operated as an unregulated soap opera with controversial storylines and surprising presentations. It's a world where fact and fiction are regularly blurred, where stereotypes dominate and ruthlessness reigns supreme. It is a fascinating new book called Lords of the Ring by Dan Higgins, and did I say that Dan joins me? He's limbering up in the far corner, and he's live on the show now. Dan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Giles.
Just a little bit. I mean, how wrestling? How? I mean, are you a wrestler yourself? How are you so eminently qualified to write this particular tome?
I'm not a wrestling myself. I grew up watching wrestling, and then about 20 years ago, I was a redcoat, like a holiday park entertainer, on the holiday parks. And I used to, as part of that job, I used to, just sing tortured cover versions and do, bad party dances and things like that. But from time to time, I'd host events as they came along. And one of them was one day the wrestling came. And so these two big wrestlers sort of showed up. One was called the Fearless Flatliner, and he looked exactly how you'd imagine a wrestler would look. He had like ribbons around his biceps. He had like a bit like Hulk Hogan, but like a British version of Hulk Hogan.
Somewhat like I'm wearing today to do this radio show, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's almost like
It's uncanny.
And he said to me, look, like, obviously we're not here every week, so people don't know who we are. So what we're going to do is we're going to have the bad guy win the main event, and then he'll challenge the audience. And then if you can stand up, I'll pick you up, throw you across the ring. 1, 2, 3, you can win. And the crowd will go wild. And I was like, okay, so... sorry, can we, do we rehearse the throw? And he was like, no, it'd be fine. So I sat there in fear, basically, for the event. And then at the end of the main event, the bad guy wins, and he screams around at this crowd of children and adults going, no one can beat me. And then I stand up, and, my holiday park shirt's ripped off my top. And I remember thinking, I've got to actually return that for my end of season bonus. And then he picked me up, threw me across the ring. The other guy caught me, went back on his back like an upturned woodlouse, and they counted the 3, and the crowd went wild. And so that was when I became sort of, into the annals of holiday park wrestling. I went. But it was a few weeks later when I was watching wrestling on TV, and I saw the guy that I had beaten, in inverted commas, on WWE. And he was getting absolutely pummeled by this character. And the character was like sort of presented as like a wild, savage sort of character. And the more I looked around, I was like, God, who are these characters, and why are people booing them? Why are people cheering them? And there was lots of like national identity like thrown in. So there was like Irish characters that were running around with like leprechauns. There was like British characters with like, pictures of the Queen and drinking tea all the time. There was Mexican characters on Juan Deere lawnmowers. So these characters were everywhere, and they're quite big stereotypes that you wouldn't think you could get away with on like soap operas and things like that. So it really made me question, like, what is this world? And why does it encapsulate all these different things? And it made me just think I need to talk to these people. So the book is really an adventure, a deep dive into the world of wrestling, and looks at sort of what it means to society and the impact that it's sort of had on the world around us.
Because here's the thing, because there's this Greco-Romano wrestling, which is at the Olympics, which is, very, very serious, best known exponent of that, John Irvine, who wrote The World According to Garp and The Waterman. That's his thing. He was a wrestler, and that's why wrestling's in Garp, for example. I'm a little bit older than you, so I grew up Saturday afternoon, ITV, World of Sport, giant, Big Daddy, Giant Haystacks, Mick McManus, Kenzo Nagasaki, right? That's late 70s, so that dates me. And then 30 years ago now, it was all Hulk Hogan. This is pre-rock stuff even. Hulk Hogan, The Undertaker, etc., etc. That's the first time that we got WW, or whatever it was called then. And we were like, oh, that's the Americans. It is far too over the top. And yet here we are. And in the last, 15, 20 years, WWE has come in, and is it? It's a suspension of disbelief, but also, here we go, Dan. Here's my theory. Do with it what you want. Pantomime for grown-ups. You can scream and shout and go, oh yes, oh no, we can't, etc., etc. And it has always been thus, from little old ladies throwing their handbags at giant haystacks in the late 70s.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think what I would say, it's like a soap opera, but where every storyline ends in a fight, sometimes in a steel cage. So, like, essentially, it's not, when you watch wrestling on TV, you're not watching Greco-Roman wrestling. You're not watching wrestling. You're watching a television show about wrestling. So it's people approach it like a drama. People would always say to me, it's not real. And it'd be like, yeah. And most of the audience, like, obviously kids might think it's real and stuff like that. But most of the audience, 99.9%, are not watching it thinking it's real. They're watching it for entertainment. Like, you'd go to a theatre and suspend your belief for that hour and a half. You'd think, I'm going to watch this theatre production and take it in and pretend it's real for the time it's on. With wrestling, it's also a breaking of that fourth wall. But when you watch wrestling, you accept that you're just going to play along with this for the time being and see where it goes. So I think it's very much that. And even in the world of sport, Kendo Nagasaki, you were thinking that was going to be a big reveal of like this Eastern character when it was, Peter Thornley from Stoke. So it's always been that show. A pantomime for grown-ups is a good way. It's a good way to talk. Now
you see, you've just gassed in my flabber, because I'm from Stoke, and you're telling me that Kendo Nagasaki was actually, say again,
Peter Thornley from Stoke. Yeah, I believe that. I hope I haven't got that wrong now.
I don't know. I will get the research team on that immediately. Yeah. There
was another person I spoke to from Stoke as well, and she was called Klondike Kate, and she wrestled Big Daddy. And she was part of the world of sport. Her real name's Jane. Yeah. But like Klondike Kate, so one of the themes of the book is it looks at like how women's wrestling has changed over time. And women's wrestling was actually banned in lots of places, including London and cities around the world, until like 1987. Right. And it was thought that, and what Jane said to me in the book was that it was the fear of like the Dirty Mac Brigade coming to watch the matches. And obviously I'm 40 years old, and I was like, could you explain the Dirty Mac Brigade to me?
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
And so it was like, but she would tell me, and like you were describing earlier, how grannies, it was famous for grannies loving it, pantomime for grown-ups. She told me about all these horrific situations. She was a bad guy woman. A big woman, and she like would decimate her opponents, and everyone hated her, but they hated her so much. Like, there was all these stories she told me about bricks in handbags, and like she played this cattle market in Norwich, and she got a farmer with a foot and mouth injection, put it in her bum on the way to the ring. And when these horrific stories, but she's talking to me about them and she's laughing about them as if like, oh yeah, and that happened and that happened. There's so many, like, and I go into like far more detail with her in the book, but it's like, it was just shocking how, people in the audience did. And in like, this is a woman from Stoke. She became like a big star in the UK in that British golden age and wrestled Big Daddy, but they absolutely hated her and took it very seriously.
What was the sort of the revitalisation of it then, do you think? Because I mean, by sort of the 80s, I mean, until the American WWF came or whatever it was called then. Yes, it was, because it was WWF, because people were getting confused with that and pandas, weren't they? That was the whole thing.
Yeah, there was a lawsuit actually by the World Wildlife Fund, and they changed their name to WWE. Yeah, so that's the difference. They are the same organisation. I talk about both in the book, and I have to have a footnote to say, look, I will talk about WWF and WWE, but here's the reason why the name is what it is.
But was that the whole thing? Because I can't. There was obviously wrestling in the States, because it must be. And I'm thinking, because we tend to think, the glitz, the glamour, the president of the United States, etc., getting involved, because he loves wrestling. He absolutely, it's everything he thinks, but. Presumably this is, county fairs. This is that whole sort of barnstorming entertainment thing, isn't it? And so there's always been a background of wrestling in the States as well. Because I suppose if you're covering wrestling from a production point of view, as a TV you don't need like 18 cameras and a linesman, and it's not like covering football or whatever. It's a small ring, and so therefore the to cover it on TV isn't a great outlay.
No, yeah, exactly. I think that what you have with wrestling is you have the ability to create drama that you might not have with something like boxing, where, you have all the build-up and the fanfare, but it's over in a couple of seconds because someone's got a good punch away and it's over. What wrestling allows is to create that storyline and almost like that cinema of, if this was to turn out in the most interesting possible way, what would that be? So it's like, it's like what I said, it's that soap opera where every storyline ends in the fight. There is no need for sort of VAR, but refs do get involved and things like that. But to your point earlier, it's like wrestling has been on a massive journey, like it's had different peaks of popularity. Right now, we're in a new peak of popularity with wrestling. There hadn't been wrestling at Wembley Stadium since 1992. And now every summer there's a massive wrestling show that fills out Wembley. It's got a Netflix deal now. And there's several wrestling companies around, including in the UK. So it's like there is And the other thing that I've noticed certainly since writing the book is it's everywhere. Like, I've seen wrestling in the book, in the adventure into wrestling. I've seen wrestling in a primary school. I've seen it in a church. I've seen it in a bandstand, arenas, stadiums.
In a church, in the red corner, in the red corner, the reverend, and in the blue corner, the viper verger or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I've seen it in, I've heard of it in prisons, in libraries. Like, when people, basically, a wrestler told me in the book, he said, walk into a room and the first question is like, could we fit a ring in here? And, and I started in wrestling flying through the ring at a holiday park.
Yeah.
So it really is just sort of, it's permeated these sort of building blocks of our communities and integrated itself, perhaps without us realizing. Like, when I start the journey, it's like, is this a new peak of popularity for wrestling, or has it been hiding in plain sight sort of the whole time?
Because there is this, I suppose, there has always been people want to see the bit of entertainment, and away from the millionaire superstars, there is that I suppose there's a wrestling community who go about that. I mean, one of the most brilliant films I've ever seen is The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke. Which is which during one of those troughs, isn't it? That's the whole thing. I mean, that's Aaron Aronofsky's film. And there was one with Florence. Was it Florence Pugh? The other thing about fighting with the family. And so is there that sense of sort of community amongst?
There is an amazing sense of community in wrestling. Like, I actually was part of a training camp in wrestling. I went to a training camp and they put me through my paces. And, you have all these, they're like, okay, you put you into a headlock, stamp on his feet, elbow him, put you into a hammerlock. And I'm like shouting to the stagehand for line. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like, I can't possibly keep up with this level of sort of interaction. But when you're, the training camp is like, they sort of teach you how to become a wrestler, and they learn these sort of things on the spot. So, like, if they're in a match and someone does a headlock on them, that they can stamp on them and elbow them and things like that. So it really has become like sort of this this community around it is like helping them, not just sort of, with general fitness and things like that, but there was really in that training camp a real community of helping each other, like supporting each other, whatever their age and ability. And I saw that like all around this community. And then there's the fan community.
Yeah.
And one thing that I started following around, this guy called Big Joe. And Big Joe does a bit of a different match, which is called like a death match. And what he uses in a death match is like pots and pans and weapons and things like that. Normally that he's bought from like, B&Q or something, or like something like that. And so I started following him round, and it ended in this match against at this nightclub with this training camp. And like, even like after that match, I spoke to both of the wrestlers involved in this weapons match, and they were just like, he's getting a lot out of this, and like, it's really great to see him face someone so big on the independent scene. They're so supportive of each other, both the fan base and the wrestlers themselves.
And here's the thing, because you're talking about going to training camp, because those who maybe don't know their wrestling might go, well, it's just a bunch of big girls flying around the thing, but neck locks. These are generally big guys or very fit guys and girls. They know how to handle themselves. But if they don't do the choreography, then one mistimed elbow, one sort of neck lock that goes too hard could result. I know this is going to sound that people are going to go, oh, for goodness sake. But if you're doing the dance, if you're choreographing something like that and it goes wrong, you could break somebody's arm or worse.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, there are loads of injuries in wrestling all the time, just like there are in like football and football training. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and things go wrong when you use weapons. Like there is, this is not to say that it's not scripted, but like in weapons matches, they are really hitting each other with those pots and pans. Do you know what I mean? It's like there is no way to get around that. Like it's, but it still is telling the story and has a scripted finish and is trying to. What they said to me, really, like what's consistent. All the wrestlers I spoke to, we're just trying to put on the best show possible.
And the thing with you see, you may or may not have noticed it, but we're in the middle of a World Cup, all right? I mean, there's a bit of football going on.
I have noticed.
That's why you in the top dollars. But again, and I'm showing my age, but in the 80s, football was like, sort of decent, sort of middle class Guardian reeling, whatever. So the Prime Minister certainly didn't put on an England show. That didn't happen until basically after Italia 90 and then the madness that was Euro 96. And it was very poo-pooed as lower class and, very British. Oh, it's only the oiks go watch that. And to a certain extent, wrestling, it's very easy to look down your nose at wrestling and going, oh, for goodness sake, who are these people? But then you look across the audience and you see mums and dads and kids and the sort of audiences, and they've all got the T-shirts and they've all bought the merch. And it's the sort of audience that a lot of people would literally, pay great money to have them in their audience if you're the England netball squad or something like that. So they're doing something right, and it is very elitist of people to go, oh well, it's only it's bread, it's bread and circuses for the masses.
Yeah, I think there is that snobbery there. But the funny thing is, like, the royal family used to watch wrestling. They used to go to the Royal Albert Hall and watch wrestling. Like, so, I mean, it's this interesting, and it changes around the world as well. Like in Mexico, it's a very like working class thing. Like, but it changes from state to state in America. It changes where you are in the world. Certainly in the UK, you do see a lot of like families, and maybe that's part of that resurgence of popularity. It's parents taking their children to wrestling. And I think that, it's really, there is sort of this, there is a snobbery, and it's sometimes a hurdle that you sort of need to explain and get over. And the part of the book that explores that is like, look at the impact that this has had on society across lots of different themes, across, how gender has changed, how those national identity stereotypes that we spoke about earlier, and how politics, you mentioned Trump and how like he's been a wrestling character. And he actually, if you look at it, it's like very similar to his rallies. It's like and it was way before his rallies, and it's first time in front of a live audience. Did he use it as a dress rehearsal, like for those rallies? And so it's like, it's very integrated and intersected into our society, but there is a snobbery there. And one of the things that I explore and look at in the book is this episode from the 90s. There was like a show in America called Donahue. And it's like Oprah Winfrey. It's like, a daytime talk show. And wrestling was very infrequently in the mainstream shows like that. And they had this show, and it was about like quite serious allegations, which I don't need to go into here. But like, it was about very serious allegations. But the audience were watching it. And when the presenter would talk about the serious allegations, they would laugh. And it's quite a weird... It's quite a weird sort of watch, because you're like, this is serious. Why are you laughing at this? And then it has 45 minutes of like, back and forth on the allegations with the people involved. And then it gets to the audience questions at the end. And the audience questions tell you a lot about that snobbery, because they're like, well, isn't wrestling just like icky? Okay. And then the final question is, well, this is all fake though, isn't it? Yeah. So it's a total misunderstanding. I think the blurred lines of wrestling of like, this presentation of wrestling as like crossing those lines of real and fake has confused people and continues to confuse people. And so, I think there is a snobbery, and I explore that in the book through everything.
And I'm really interested that you mentioned Mexico, because if you don't know, I mean, wrestling in Mexico, it's done with people in masks, and that anonymity has allowed, and people go, I didn't know yet, but it's allowed, again, people, it's huge in Mexico wrestling, and it allows them to get points across, political points, with anonymity, because, hey, spoiler alert, a couple of years ago, Mexico wasn't exactly a firm democracy, and so they could stand up for the rights of the poor, and they could be heroes in a way that perhaps, somebody that, I don't know, Oscar de la Renta, the boxer, couldn't be, and they could make these points because they were always masked, and so that's a really interesting dynamic as well. And you mentioned politics there, and as you said before, because Trump's got the politics, and we're also seeing, it's double pronged here, we're also seeing people like The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, has made that crossover from being this Samoan wild child or whatever. Then he becomes an actor, and people have been saying he's going to run for governor of California, or he's going to run for president at some point.
Yeah, and I think that is definitely an area I explore in the book. And what I do is I speak to wrestlers who have become politicians. So, like, people might remember Jesse Ventura being governor of Minnesota in the 90s and beating both like Democrats and Republicans to it and shocking the world, really. But like, he was the first in America, and a lot of people have followed that path. But there are, you talk about like transferable skills of wrestling and politics. It's like, it's the good versus bad sort of dynamic. It's speaking about your opponents as the bad guy. It's like, you're the white knight who needs to come and save the day. And the same is true of like politics. And that's enabled people to sort of give the platform to move into it. So I speak to, and it's funny you mentioned masks, because I speak to this man not in Mexico but in Japan, but he's a lucha libre wrestler in Japan,
right? And
his name is called Skull Reaper.
That's a good name, isn't it?
It's a very lovely name.
Exactly.
It's sort of like Grim Reaper. I think it's supposed to be like Grim Reaper.
Right, Skull Reaper will do. I'll do that.
He collects skulls, not souls, and he moved into politics in Japan. And it's sort of like if Lord Buckethead or Count Binface was elected in the UK in one of those elections, but you never found out what their name was or their true identity was. And in the case of Skull Reaper, he was elected, and then everyone was like, oh my God, we've got this masked wrestler elected. He can't wear his masks in meetings, and he has to reveal his identity. And there was this big debate in Japan of like whether that was okay to remove his mask or not. And it led to a more philosophical debate about, do politicians all wear masks in public? Anyway, they found a rule in the council meetings, which was like, if you enter the council chamber, you can't wear a walking stick or a hat. And they used that to make him unmask. And he sued. He had a court case against the council. So I go into that. I find Skull Reaper, and I speak to him in the book about his journey into politics and what happened with the court case.
And on a sort of a more, a smaller level, or you could say, it's, again, I talk about the inspiration, but you think of somebody like John Cena, the wrestler turned actor, and you get, he does these one-on-ones with, and if you go onto like the socials, you'll see, these people saying, my mum or I had stage 3 cancer, and I thought about you, and you pulled me through. And these guys are absolutely, these tough men are absolutely floored by this, because people can relate to their wrestling heroes, can't they? There's not a lot of diva-nish, even over in the States where they earn bucket loads of cash. There's still that connect, if you like. They kind of realize where they come. You don't get sort of a Myra Carey sort of figure coming in and wanting no green M&Ms or something like that. So there is that connect, as they say, isn't there, Dan?
Yeah, exactly. And John Cena is what I think he's given the most wishes to children in history, or something like that. There is definitely a thing about, wrestling is about heroes and villains, and looking up at these heroes and hating the bad guys. And I think that gives people inspiration and someone to back. And when I speak to whoever it is, whatever age they are, like whether it's people who loved the British Golden Age, or whether it's people who loved Hulk Hogan or The Rock, or like more modern day, whether they started watching or infrequently watched it, everyone's got a sort of a connection to wrestling in their life. That's what I found. It's like, even people who haven't watched it since they were a child, or, they remember their nana watching it. Even I remember growing up and like, my granddad saying Big Daddy every time wrestling came up, and someone would go giant haystacks in response, like it was like Marco Polo or something.
Yeah.
But it was this, everybody I've spoke to has got some sort of connection with wrestling in their life, even if they like have to think about it and go, yeah, I actually do. And that's sort of what this book is about. It's like a love letter to wrestling in many ways, but an exploration of it and how it intersects with all these things that we've spoke about, with whether it's like, you know, those stereotypes, whether it's these heroes and villains, whether it's like the blurring of reality, or whether it's, you know, politics and more social issues like that.
You see, if you were a child of the 70s, as I was, you would, and this just struck me, because I will always remember this would be the thing that would call you in from the garden, okay, on those rare summer days. Come in, it's wrestling, Big Daddy, Kendo Nagasaki, Mick McManus, John Haystack. Then it would be the Tottenham 3, West Ham 2, and then it would be tea time, and that was it. And so it's really got into that sort of cut, and you would always be watching it with somebody's grandparent who'd been in the war and the whole thing, and they'd probably seen unimaginable horrors, but they were getting into it. And as you said, you know, nans and grands, you know, not with bricks in their handbags, but watching it, you know, because it was
some with bricks,
some with bricks, yeah, but not at home in Stoke. I hated to. Yeah. What did you discover on your journey, Dan, as they would say? What was the outcome of your journey?
Well, I'm not going to give you the outcome because
they're reading the book.
Yeah, reading the book. But what I would say is it held a mirror up to sort of society and really the best and worst of it. And you know, it's like this moral code that sort of exists through all of it, which is, you know, it's that good versus evil. It's that David versus Goliath. It's putting on the best show possible. And, you know, I spoke to lots of people on the journey. I spoke to big stars. Like, there's a guy called Mick Foley. I don't know if you know Mick Foley. He was The Rock's tag team partner. He was a WWF tag team champion. World champion. Yeah. I spoke to Klondike Kate from the British Golden Age. I spoke to people who are getting into wrestling now and don't know anything about the Dirty Mac Brigade sort of era. And they're trying out...
Foot and mouth and all that sort of thing, yeah.
And they're trying out for WWE as, like, you know, I spoke to a woman who's performing as a woman athlete, which they weren't really looked at ever. And I speak to across that spectrum, like, you know, Big Joe, the deathmatch wrestler. And so it's really everything in our society, like the lucha libre, whatever. And so... and really, there was the common theme around all of it was like, we're putting on a show with people. We're doing our best to, you know, and there's a community within the wrestlers themselves. There's a community with the crowd. Some of these wrestlers are never going to make it as stars. They're never going to make it as big. But it was about, you know, it's like putting on the best show possible. And I think that's what it really came down to.
The book is called Lords of the Ring, The World According to Wrestling. It's by Dan... probably the wild man, Higgins. I don't know if that was your wrestling tag. Listeners, you can order it by going on to, and it's a great front cover. Go on to our virtual bookstore, click on it, and it'll be winging its way to you in quick order. Dan, if people want to follow you on the socials or online, where can people find you?
I'm on Dan Higgins Writer at Instagram, and that's probably where you can get most of the content. And there's some fun clips of the training camp that I mentioned, and there will soon be the flying through the air at the holiday park as well. So if you want to see some visuals to go with the words, the Instagram Dan Higgins Writer is the place to go.
The book's called Lords of the Ring. Dan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Giles.